Hi, I'm Nick Holland, the Director of Research at Liminal. Liminal is a boutique strategy advisory firm serving executives, corporate strategy, innovation, and M&A teams focused on digital identity, fintech, and cybersecurity. What we do: market intelligence and research, product design and management, go-to-market and growth strategy, and M&A and transaction services. And welcome to the Thesis. Today we're going to talk about personal identity ecosystems, and I'm joined today by Charles Walton, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Identity at Avast. Charles has held senior leadership roles in identity management for companies such as MasterCard, IDEMIA, SecureKey, Inside Secure, and more, going back as far as CyberTrust in 1994, which is, I think, about as far back as the famous New Yorker dog on the internet cartoon. That was still fresh at that time. So Charles Walton, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Nick, thanks a whole lot. You really aged me with the 1994 reference, but in any case, really glad to be here today.
You're an elder statesman of the industry, so thank you for joining me.
Yeah,
I'm not quite your vintage, but very close. I was writing about Bluetooth in about 2000, so you know it's again veterans. Anyway, I digress. So we're going to talk about personal identity ecosystems, or PIEs, as I mentioned. So I want to very quickly provide some context around that. Okay, so first of all, quick overview of where we are today. So this is kind of an illustrative current state, but this is not entirely representative. But what we have here at the top is the consumer. The consumer has literally hundreds of one-to-one relationships with entities that provide credentials. That would be maybe Amazon, Etsy, as example, Nordstrom, Bonobos, Chase, Fidelity, whoever. As a consumer, you will have, again, typically 100 plus of these individual accounts with organizations. That means that it's probably not sustainable or likely that you're going to have a unique password for each of these. You're probably going to default to some pretty lazy practices around identity management. It's also very cumbersome. Again, you're going to have to go and know the passwords, go through probably two-factor auth for a lot of these. It's going to be complicated. And on the back end, you've got, again, for each one of these relationships, you've probably got a data aggregation on the back end that is prone to data breaches, as we've seen. And again, it's not only something that happens on a sort of fairly rare occurrence. We're looking at major data breaches on a daily basis. Further sustaining, again, the problem that's out there, which is, clearly fraud, identity management, ever more cumbersome checks and balances to get into your accounts, and the virtuous or vicious cycle continues. Moving on to where we need to be, we're suggesting, again, PIEs, or personal identity ecosystems, should be this middle layer, which is an entity that's there to capture and manage identity attributes from the consumer side, and then federate them in various ways. Again, this is illustrative. We've got some potential PIE players here in terms of the logo cloud for Facebook, PayPal, Microsoft, Apple, Google, but it could be a whole host of different organizations. And again, this to some extent would probably solve the issue in terms of streamlining the interface from a consumer standpoint. Certainly making sure that the consumer privacy is much more in their control. And on the back end, you've got a far more robust management of the credentials, since they're being, again, furnished by this PIE layer. So, I mean, this is really kind of the crux of it. What we need to find out who are going to be these custodians of the personal identity ecosystem. On one side, you have trust. You need to have a safe and secure environment. It has to be, to some extent, user controlled, has to preserve privacy, or at least certainly allow for consent if privacy, if personal information is going to be stored, and transparency in terms of how that's being used. On the other axis, you have a ubiquity. You have something that's understandable and simple, that's universally accepted, that can be portable from one place to another, and is certainly easy to use. So it's something that is accessible to all strata of society. And Charlie, let's get into the meat of the discussion. I'd like to firstly ask you, I mean, again, from what you've seen in your, I could say, a vast experience, but pun very much intended, but where do you think it's going to go? I mean, where do you see this ecosystem evolving? You've read our research on this, but I mean, who do you see as the candidates most likely to wear the crown there?
Yeah, so it's really a great one, Nick. And what I'd have to do is maybe first off say that I think we're on the verge of some evolution, right? This notion of trust is inherently built in silos between me and a business and a business and a business and a business. And I think what you've pointed out with this notion of PI, what I would call a digital agent or a digital concierge, is really a service that works for me. In many respects, this is a bit of what people are lacking today, a service that's on my behalf. So one that's not tied to an organization that's intending to monetize my data or to utilize my data for any sort of commercial matter. So that's probably number one. Number two, I'd say organizations that have motive or inherently desire to create lock into a community or ecosystem using my data are another that I don't feel are good candidates. Now, good candidates for sure are very likely going to need to be in the tech space, in the security space, in the privacy space, and with the attribute of having my back. So really to be working on my behalf to make the notions of interacting in a trustworthy way more convenient, more secure, and more private. I don't think there could be a better time for an organization as a new entrant. As we all know, this is a really new category, and so I'd say organizations that have had security, privacy, technology competency, and as well have been able to support the consumer, that have been on the consumer's side helping the consumer, are really great candidates in that regard.
So, I mean, what kind of entities would you put into that bucket?
So I do believe that we may end up finding organizations that have been in the financial services space, that in many respects where we've got an organization in financial services that has engendered my trust, that has been able to deliver that, and we're able to kind of attach on. That's kind of one category. I think in one of your prior charts, you had depicted a PayPal. You might depict a group of banks that come together that work in the regard. But I'd say further, this is an area that Avast is looking at as well, right? An organization as ourselves with 435 million consumers, where they're trusting us to help protect their devices. This is a category that we're looking at as well. So I think we've got the opportunity for new entrants from the tech space to kind of enter in. Again, I think the idea of being in a particular device ecosystem or in the realm of social media where data monetization and advertising is central to business models are just really disqualifiers.
I would tend to agree. I mean, it's interesting. I think the bank ecosystem model has been seen to work in the past with, I mean, Early Warning still is a consortia of banks that is sort of federating information between them in a anonymous manner. I think people trust banks. I think that's been proven. I had this discussion with Dave Birch a couple of years ago, actually, like who he would see as kind of the potential players in this space, and banks seem like a good place. And I do tend to agree with you again. I think, I mean, back to ubiquity and trust. I mean, by operating system, you're clearly polarizing to, disqualify the other half that isn't using your operating system. And as you mentioned, the entities that are out there that are being a little bit, let's say, I'd say mercenary with distributing or selling our data. I mean, when it gets bad enough that you have to consider changing the name of your company because your brand has become that toxic for doing that kind of thing, you're probably in trouble with trust. I mean, it's kind of like, you're a Monsanto or Philip Morris at that point. So, I think I'm kind of with you on that. So we've got, again, potential sort of ecosystem player. I mean, Avast again would make a lot of sense, maybe also in conjunction with payment networks or financial institutions. What about some of the government?
I think with that respect, I think I failed to mention this word collaboration, because I think for anyone to succeed here, it does involve an appropriate matter of collaboration.
Right.
Your very diagram had me interacting with lots of silos, And if there's an approach that is not respectful of the way the world's wired today, and what we'd say siloed based trust organizations, beginning to bring them together, if that collaboration can occur, we probably don't have a win for the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the phrase that you said that really, I think, are latched onto is, they need to have your back as a consumer. You need to, you need to trust them, but they also need to be somewhat altruistic. Maybe it's not about selling your credentials or selling you things. It's got to be more for the greater good, the collective, tide that raises all ships, as they say. So it's,
yes.
So, I mean, there's, again, I mean, other types of entities that maybe fit that description. I mean, there's clearly a lot of activity in EIDs, particularly in Europe. I think there's something like 22 initiatives at this point in time, and they're starting to mesh together. Some of those as well, driven by, bank and telco ecosystems. I think there's one in Belgium that is specifically banks and telcos, which has become quite powerful as a means of, again, federating identity for purposes that aren't just around government activities, so things like age assurance or whatever. Again, that seems to have some legs.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think really all fabulous initiatives. I think the other mechanism here is we may see a national scheme, or driven by a consortia, by a government, and so on, bringing them together with ubiquity. As we know, Nick, we've got a real small world. So I as an American interacting with a UK business or an Australia business or a Spanish business, we're going to have a view of ubiquity, and that's where standards begin to come in. It's also where we see the topic of decentralized identity, or SSI, coming to bear. And you mentioned the European Commission and wallet-related work, and I think certainly a view that this will be a very, very helpful way to run pan-Europe, pan-member state, and actually begin to run the globe. So I do think that this notion of a backplane of decentralization is actually quite important.
Absolutely, and as you say, when you bring in SSI, self-sovereign identity, for those who don't know, I'm not sure who wouldn't know that watching this at this point in time. But again, I think back to, again, putting the consumer at the center of that ecosystem, and it's their choice where the information is federated, and it's their option to retract that information. It's truly managing the right to be forgotten per GDPR and so on. And I think that's also an interesting layer as well. You've got to be able to not only provide identity, but also the ability to preserve privacy around these as well.
That's very, very, very true, Nick. And in fact, I mean, you've described managing these things. I think I need that tool, that digital agent, to help, to work on my behalf, to be the smarts that is advising me, and as I said, has really got my back. And that is in the areas, simply with some of the problems we deal with today with authentication. It extends into identity as we've thought about it today, and it will get there with things that are more sophisticated. We'll call it a smart agent dealing with reputational identity, that will be an important ground for the future.
Right. We're clearly reading all the same white papers, so it's
okay, good.
We're talking the same language here for sure. So, I mean, I guess just quickly, I mean, what is, like, I think the migratory path then? How do we get from where we are today to this nirvana of decentralized, self-controlled, self-federated identities?
Well, I think, Nick, as you probably know, as we've all been in the industry, this topic has been brewing for a while, and I think as we're here in 2021, getting into 2022, this European Community Initiative is, I know, one catalyst for sure, but I think the community is at almost an innovation disruption point. I think we're at a stage where we could begin to see some breakout players just getting out and starting to do it. We're at the point where the standards are not fully all aligned, but they're all there well enough to start seeing some really nice implementations. I think this is about rolling up the sleeve, putting capability in front of a user, and letting them kind of run with it. So I think we're going to see some breakout plays in 2022.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, clearly the pandemic has been something of a catalyst in terms of shining a light on some of the really I would say terrible legacy things that we had to put up with over the years in terms of, you know, how our digital lives could have been transformed. And this is really, I think, you know, driving the future of this, again, personal identity ecosystem. So certainly I'm all with you on this. So fascinating talking with you, Charles. Really appreciate your time today. That's Charles Walton with Avast. And for Liminal, I'm Nick Holland. Thank you very much.